Now, every so often in Iran, the mask slips. Outwardly, the Tehran government likes the endorsement of the voters, even in flawed and disputed elections like the one which apparently returned Mahmoud Ahmadinejad to power. But the treatment of detainees, prisoners and street protesters has often been brutal, though usually beyond the sight of witnesses. We have a special report now from John Lyne, which contains some graphic descriptions of ill treatment at the hands of the authorities in the Islamic Republic of Iran.
This is what happens to opposition demonstrators in Iran these days. One of the thugs is about to hit this woman on the head. But the protesters are standing their ground. These were pictures sent in or posted on the internet by opposition supporters yesterday. The demonstrators reported some of the toughest repression since the election. Tear gas, baton charges, and the firing of plastic bullets and paintballs. These crowds gathered despite all that. But the real threat is what happens if the police move in and arrest you. Ibrahim Mohtari is an opposition supporter who's now fled to Turkey. He gave us a rare eyewitness account of his arrest and treatment in prison.
I left a friend's office to do some shopping. I noticed a bike following me. I felt worried. He followed me to a side road, then came another bike. They got off and pushed me to a wall and forced me to get in a car with them. I was put in a cell with no windows. The mattress was covered with dry blood. I was scared. I was interrogated, beaten up and physically assaulted. It got uglier by the hour.
To support his account, he's produced a medical report and pictures. Most explosively, he's one of the first people with first-hand evidence that appears to back claims that Iranian opposition detainees have been sexually assaulted in prison. He describes being brutally penetrated.
They used a baton, any sharp instrument available to them. I regained my consciousness, finding a man sitting on top of me. I had no clothes on. I was so hurt I couldn't move. They sat me on a chair and started beating me again. I fell on the floor. I felt blood running from my head, ears and nose. Then a man appeared, touched my head and shouted at the others, "What have you done?" He looked worried. All of a sudden he felt kind and concerned, then asked me to sign a letter that said nothing bad happened to me in that place.
یعنی جنبش سبز رو روی سایت‌ها و وبلاگ‌ها برامون دنبال کرده.
There were more accounts of abuse from callers to BBC Persian TV. The authorities in Iran say BBC Persian is part of a plot to overthrow the Islamic Republic with a velvet revolution. They've threatened prison just for the act of phoning in. But after yesterday's demonstrations, PTV was flooded with calls.
From the people we get on our program, the interactive show of BBC Persian TV, we feel the hostility is getting more and more, the frustration with the government from the lack of addressing any of the issues that people are asking for them to be addressed. There is a feeling of terror because every time that a person in Iran decides to go on the streets and join the demonstrations against the government, they are making a very conscious decision of risking getting beaten up, getting imprisoned, getting all kinds of allegations about torture that we've heard, and having to go and do television confessions and all of the things we've all witnessed in the past few months.
So where do you think the opposition movement is going from here?
I think the opposition leaders are, in a way, following the crowds. They're not leading the crowds at this moment. The protesters on the streets have become more spontaneous and more self-rising in a way that they are not being led by the leaders of the opposition, namely Mr. Mousavi or Karoubi or Mr. Khatami. In a way, they are having to follow the crowds of the protesters and see where the movement is going to take them.
So what about President Ahmadinejad's government? Do you think they've succeeded now in consolidating power after the election?
I think they feel they are still at risk, because if they didn't feel that, they wouldn't feel the need of showing such brutality on the streets, or not allowing the people to do demonstrations or television appearances or the way people are being arrested and beaten up on the street, I think is a very obvious sign that if you don't feel threatened, you wouldn't be so harsh on rather peaceful group of people who are on the street.
President Ahmadinejad continues as if nothing untoward has happened, and he's persuaded a number of foreign leaders to go along with the illusion of normality. Today there was a visit by the ruler of Qatar, with whom Iran shares one of the world's largest gas fields. But the demonstrators are refusing to be silenced. In the latest protest, they even trampled over a poster of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, an act of unprecedented lèse-majesté. The stakes are getting higher, and those trying to keep the regime in power realise it, from president to prison warders.
In Islam, rape is a serious crime. I wasn't raped, but sexually assaulted with a baton. Those who did it consider themselves Muslims. They want the Islamic Republic to survive. They must think sexual assault does not carry the same weight as rape. These men would do anything to crush those who don't like the system, even their own people.
The opposition are determined to keep harassing the government. There doesn't seem to be any immediate threat to Mr. Ahmadinejad's survival, but it's an unstable situation that surely cannot stay the same indefinitely.
John Line reporting. I'm joined now by Potkin Azarmehr, who's an Iranian blogger and opposition activist living here in Britain. Obviously, the treatment of Mr. Mohtari is quite disgusting, but, I mean, is that typical? Have you heard of cases like this before?
Well, you know the clip that you just showed today, and I'm glad that you showed the full version today. Yesterday you only showed a bit of it. You can see the brutality in the public view, how they're treating people, how they, for no reason at all, you know, how they're beating people up, women, girls in the streets. If this is what's happening in the public, just imagine what goes on in the prisons. The Islamic Republic or any dictatorship has to thrive on making people fear them. But what's happened, it's got to a point where the people don't fear them anymore. Again, if you look at that footage, you see the young girls that are getting beaten up or the boy who's going to the help of the girl that's been knocked out. You don't see any fear in the people anymore. And talking to the people on the ground, what they tell me is that, you know, we don't fear death anymore. What we fear is that our children will miss their chance to live in a free Iran. That's the mood of the people.
But even if you're right, and even if the protesters are terribly brave, isn't their cause pretty much hopeless? Because trying to overthrow the government in the Islamic Republic, which appears to be what they're trying to do, or you might put it a different way, trying to institute a democratically elected government, it does seem like a rather hopeless struggle, doesn't it?
No, not at all. What the coup has done, what this election coup has done, is that it's united the Iranian people in a way that we haven't seen in the last 30 years. You know, now we have a large part of the clergy who are against the government. We have part of the old establishment who are against the government. We have the rich, we have the poor, we have the young, we have the old. You know, the line has been drawn, and the line is: are you for the coup or are you against the coup? And you have to be Iranian to understand how Iranians feel at the moment.
By the coup, sorry to interrupt, but by the coup you mean Ahmadinejad being re-elected?
Absolutely, yeah, which
you consider
to be a coup, yeah. And, you know, you have to be Iranian to understand the Iranian mentality and the way the Iranians feel at the moment. They've got to a point where nothing else matters to them. The tipping balance is reached to an extent where, you know, they have to win this struggle.
Could I put to you some obvious points which have been made to me, which is that the protests are localised. They tend to be the urban elite, not in the countryside, which you may dispute.
Who says that? Well, that's what Galloway tells the people, but that's not the case at all. It's complete nonsense.
So that's not. It's widespread. But whoever succeeds will be from within the ruling elite. It will not be some sort of popular revolution, will it?
But even the ruling elite have changed, as the BBC Persian presenter was saying. You know, they thought by detaining the reformist leaders they will decapitate the movement, but they're not the people that are heading the movement. The movement has now got localised leaders that are pushing it forward, and very much so, as the BBC Persian representative said, the people like Mousavi and Karabi, they're following the crowd. Let me tell you something.
Mr. Azarmehr, we're out of time, but thanks very much. Sorry to cut you off.